The change. Any recommendations for?
No. What about you?
I'm good.
Okay.
You sent out stuff?
Huh?
When you send out stuff?
Yeah, I sent it all.
Okay, I just got it.
Okay, good.
All I gotta do is just say it.
Yeah, no worries.
Bingo.
Also good.
Great. You. The modern fiction of finance is coherent through an economy of racial speculation where racial death-making coheres worldly profit-making. The formalization of a wage economy as understood through monetary transfer produces a hierarchical relationship between the imperial citizen and the forcibly indebted colonial subjects. Formal inclusion into the economy is not one based on the sustenance of life nor living, but rather an expropriation or socially reproductive labors into financial apparatus to produce constant death warrants for those who we ought to be in community with, as brought to Part 19. Lacking debates about racial capitalism is attentive to how an emancipation created relationality between the imperial citizen, forcibly indebted colonial black subject coercion, racialized appropriation and elimination structured the ongoing operation of universal jurisdictional categories of state law, degradation, racialized community service, the basis of value, the production of the incarcerated disposable subject for central economic liberalism, the making ability to keep peoples in state injured, mortal racialized violence, not economic but infrastructural, financial, discourse the conjure up debt society value from extracted subjects to pay the children and other existence, and belief relations among creditors, racial debt or subject, and the universal fungibility of all value on earth. Killing is to be monetized, and thus making racial slavery was not action of the impulse. Repelling imperial man did not end with abolition, rather extended emancipation itself. In a financialized system, a living wage naturalizes the violence and dispossession necessary to even cohere such an economy. Workers serve the spoil of genocides in Gaza, Sudan, Tigray, Palestine continue to require the extraction of black and native flesh for the world to live. We must refuse liberalism to attempt to seduce us as middle managers of racial slavery and the conquest that attempt the robber to share the spoils of racial extraction that pays people for a hit job of occupying native people, or worse, we instill the logics of white possessions that train blacking native people to become the informants for empire fueling a pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative, where if you work, you will be alive. In order for to implement a ways that are truly able to produce the capacity of living, you must think outside the schema of financing fiction and monetary incentives. Instead, tend to our own collective social wage, what is a duty to others, to the dead, to the dying, to the earth, to the intimacies that animate us and remind us that the world, another world is impossible. Beyond the inconsistent death words that racial capitalism attempts to seduce us into, there is a difference between here living and survivalism. To survive requires to accept the conditions of wage. Whiteness to survive one more day at the expense of racial others, and capitalism instead. If we wish to make life livable for those who exist in unlivable conditions, we must first organize to abolish the death words conjured up by the sovereign, the terror ability to deposit roadblocks meeting the terror of economic criminalization for community free breakfast, to the bodies of sex workers. True living requires the abolition of terror, the abolition of which all make life unlivable. That's what it gets 16. The need to weaponize human life, people, create forms of relationality, survival, revolt, and collective being. What the fuck? It means to live in under civilization, in the world of living, or to not futilely into white beings, seducing another method, the sense of political affinity, conception of good living, insurgent activities, protest, underground political warfare, vital for the state, resisting life, performance of redirected energies, and liberals desire to distance themselves from whiteness rather than challenge it. Revolutionary politics is an organization strategy opposed to oppositional intellectual work, questioning not whether some practices can incite a revolution, but rather how to create practices nourished by Severe, Rivera, or the Panthers. Shit does not just go down because of a random act of God. There's always a reason, spontaneous interruption, or counterinsurgency tactics to promote popular backlash against movement, and to read and listen actively. The campus played a role in major transformation of repressive conditions, students subjected to untenable labor burden, human heavy demands on their energy, physiological stresses, seeing and demonstrating what it means to inhabit the long historical responsibilities that one is an abolitionist. And a true living wage is not created through fixed and regular payments, it's created through our fixed and regular commitment to one another. Transactional relationships are necessarily exploitative and alienated. What is necessary is to create new relationships through reciprocity, that is, through mutual aid. By condemning humanity to the earth, abolition contends that another world is possible. Abolition is not a destructive act, but a creative one, which affirms the possibility of building a new world here on earth. It's the anti-civilization, no detention of freedom that defies gender and racial ascendancy of the white human by grappling with the question of how we build a world. Otherwise, abolition engenders the form of social cohesiveness in the form of mutual aid, training, and self-defense program that gives us the skills to build that world. That's Rodriguez 19. Abolition is a dream towards futurity, vested in insurgent counter-civilizational history that perform liberation under duress security for people subjected to violence. A global U.S. nation building required departure from policy reform, strategic ability to abolitionist practices, whether creative and rigorously theorized struggle, cultural state violence, jailing, detention, and policing, not merely a practice of negation, but also a generative community building abolition performs radical reconfiguration, associativity, and social formation that does not depend on the existence of the carceral state, reform characterized by the call to interview, release brutality, fail to recognize the very logic to overlapping criminal justice, policing, rights to racial, sexual, and colonialist class violence, abolition is creative, imagine the labor reformers and protect the coherence of an existing standard by adjusting its work to remaking sociality politics that reveal the underside of the new world. Abolition is pedagogy and curriculum produced. An insurgency such a critical race resistance and black youth projects to be charged inside. I don't know more, no doubt. The standing of black rocks to counter civilizational detention of freedom that defies jurisprudence and interruption of white citizenship, the indigenous queer black death. When far right state turns to moral panic by marshalling fearful defensive reaction to the war on cops, giving blue lives matter and a rebuttal to black lives subjection of the state terror task for abolitionist practices, offering a different against story against the civilization defined against modern jurisdictional coherence. Now, if we wish to make some life livable for those who exist in unlivable conditions, we must first organize to abolish the death blow conjured by the sovereign abolition of the political and jurisdictional. It's only possible given living abolition, reconceptualizing the very ways we deal with personal conflicts, hardships that occur in our homes, workplaces, neighborhoods, and schools, daily practice of creating a world without cages. Thus, we advocate for mutual aid as a recollection of social ways that represent a true living wage, as Adam said 21. It is surviving pending in the revolution of philanthropy is really the private allocation of the social wage. We're talking about the public allocation of social wage and mutual aid necessarily outside of the state. The state role, we're trying to take up the buzzword to coerce population of the society, exploit the survival pending revolution, mutual aid networks, getting prescriptions and groceries and distribute them to those who need it. Redistribution of resources alone does not solve. Racial capitalism is a tactic for alternative food and distribution networks in the face of worse socioeconomic conditions in the future. Free reproductive programs in the BPU were considered the most dangerous by Cartel Borough. The federal government would steal the idea once they had sufficiently repressed it. Widespread radical organizing that would end freedom of construction. We should continue to think about it. How the mutual aid can build dual power and erode the basis of capitalist welfare state. We, some people, are the foundation of what colonialism has described in the United States federal government. In debate, we should tend towards creativity of insurgency. That's James 17. Government active processes between citizens and representatives are a constitution of the people or for the U.S. establish the U.S. as the verb is present and apply ongoing obligation for the citizens to be active through which it obtains its power from the citizens, exercising power outside of what is given and considered unconstitutional. The way that governments function today, there is not a contract between everybody, we the people, between just the people who count, the people who are really people, the people who are really people.
You good for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. James evidence, it says that the three branches in the U.S. gains power from the people.
Yeah.
Why does that mean that is the U.S.?
Well, our argument is that the sort of we some people is a foundation for how the U.S. federal government works. We say that our sort of orientation to the government is a precondition in terms of how we should orient ourselves to the state.
Okay, like this is obviously also implicated as like a topicality argument. I understand that the state derives its power. The state derives its power from the people, but
Sure.
Why does that mean that, like specifically?
I mean, yeah.
That
So
is the US?
the James card at the top says that the sort of government is an active process organized between citizens and representatives. We've critiqued we the people as a sort of establishment for the U.S., but rather we have said we some people is a foundation for action that is done and never
Okay.
leaves the state.
What does we some people mean?
Sure. So we some people is an articulation that James 17 makes. At the end of the line, they talk about there's a contract between everybody, we the people, but just the people who count. James says our critiques we the people because it's founded in sort of whiteness. We some people is a sort of establishment that Native, Indigenous, Black, queer people
Okay.
can establish themselves in terms of orienting towards like, advocacies.
So we some people are just quote people that count. Does that?
Well, no. We've critiqued that. We said that we
Okay.
the people is the people who quote unquote just count.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. The notion of like death making, what is that?
Yeah, so Rodriguez clarifies that the sort of abolitionist pedagogy that we create here and now is necessary to analyze how death is constitutive of current economic systems, but we can go beyond that through abolitionist praxis, which create this sort of death world, or recognizing that death is a precondition to being able to make those new forms of sociality and relationality in Black and Indigenous
Okay,
communities.
like what does it mean for like death to be a precondition?
Sure. So the Manjapara card sort of explained how the emancipation created relationality between imperial citizenships and indebted to colonial subjects. We have said that rather we should reject this notion, and abolitionist pedagogy should be the forefront of how we sort of orient ourselves to politics, to
Okay.
movements, etc., etc.
So let's talk about this like abolitionist
Sure.
movement. Like what is a social wage in the
Yeah,
context of
a
like,
social wage is being indebted to one another. We say it's a constant form of payment, but it cannot be sort of utilized through economic or money understanding, but rather, like the Rodriguez 19 card elucidates, says that it's things like the BPP creating free breakfast programs, no DAPL and BlackRock creating instances of being able to deconstruct instances of settler colonialism across the United
like,
States.
For example, like, free breakfast programs is one of the examples.
Mhm.
Like, does that scale up to something bigger? What is the
What do you mean
AF
scale up?
Like, free breakfast programs certainly aren't enough to sustain a whole population.
Well,
like, does the AF result in, like, larger material change?
I mean, we say the AF is a precondition to larger material change.
Okay, precondition, would it ever result in these new changes?
What do you mean result in those new changes?
Like-
do we fiat like free breakfast programs? No.
Okay,
Uh,
that's fine.
okay.
1 and 2 is 5 off, then advantage, and then like the case.
Oh, you know, I use this one.
Yeah, sorry, sending it right now. It is sent.
Wait, no.
Just let me know whenever it's good.
What was the order?
5 then case. Case is just top down.
Right. I'm good. Oh, actually. Need 1 second.
I'm good whenever.
I'm good as well.
Okay, perfect. And just double checking Eric. Okay. The negative need not rejoin non-topical advocacy results requires the legislative instrument. LSA 5 legislative attorneys are making declarations stating policies used in the term result. The United States refers to the federal government, non-private entities that could attend ordinary common meeting. Meaning U.S. means federal government dictionaries are consistent with this given our term only the Fed, non-private entity, and living wage applies to everyone. It is achieved through a wage setting process and requires working answers. Their offense IL 24 in line with the IL Constitution of Philadelphia Declaration and the UADA chart. The living wage is taking into account hours of work achieved through a wage setting process is consistent with Article 7 of the ICE. Thus, the CR confident with the state parties are going to right of everyone and just favorable work, which provides all workers fair wages. Now, James is wrong. 1, it's not a legal definition, and it just interprets the Constitution. It is more recent and says that legal definition says it's a state. Second is that it just says that the 3 branches of the U.S. gains power from the people, not that it is the U.S. 3 expose limits allows for private factor via 50 state Africa, Mexico, wages, but doesn't allow for extra topical parts of their app that aren't about wage. Extra independently voting allows the app to feel anything claiming they result in the resolution, i.e. endorsing world peace as a method for a living wage, at least infinitely respectful for people. Notice negative for fairness and clash of anything that probably underlimits and has a role for the negative debate is innately competitive, which creates an incentive for teams to retreat for controversy. And forces the next first characterized after the debate, which eliminates the benefits of detailed proper research. Any impact intrinsic to debate as opposed to discussion comes from negation. Topical stasis produces iterative strategies that are prerequisite for debate's pedagogical value. Competition is the only valid intrinsic about individuals every aspect of Anderson's performance in debate. They also rely on fair assessments of who deserve the ballot and would negate their own often a heartbeat. It turns the case to a solvency mechanism and presupposes the game's existence absent role for the negative. Nothing distinguishes debate from other academic forums independently switch the case will prevent opponents create smart corners that iterate competitively with distinct legal solutions, patriarchy, liberalism, and white supremacy. Failure to iterate produces false positives. Next, on presumption now, the TVA's 1 is use of living wage to challenge the worker employer hierarchies key to sustaining exploitative capitalism. And June Jacques and 50 exposes fundamental contradiction in capital relation debating living wage exposes underset of the econ system in which living is a privilege and the indictment of the car regime questions regarding what it means to live in a system premised on exploitation and where the needs for workers appear irrational. Political cyber contestation, market price of labor is a principal mechanism for the laws of the capitalist society. Capital relations focus on social conditions that produce wage labor dispossession of workers. It solves their critiques capitalist relations, and the TVA can act as a first step to getting to their end result. Second is whole res is to maintain basic material needs to maintain money for mutual aid. 11 enrollment in 18 basic material needs less likely than lower wages threatens the trusted groups perceive the system not to be fair. Income differences have a horrible effect on health and happiness related to income inequality, high in social evaluation anxiety, straight living wage for prisoners to reduce recidivism. Slowly in 24 incarcerated workers in the U.S. prisons cannot form unions. Access to compensation for job-related injuries, wages are crucial because it's an affair overlap between poverty and incarceration. 45% reported no earnings before earning or entering a correctional environment. Families bear significant cost of living expenses, including supercharges. Institutions and introduce fees about have dependent children. Now the counterpoint is also TVA imperfections are negative ground competing interpretations. To use a question of the desirability of their model, they need to delineate a counter model that justifies the inclusion of their alpha, which promotes better substantive debates about debate and feels these to raise the volume of questionable theory norms, drop them, avoiding network procedural skills. Now the next I'll skip it for now. Go to the calculate authority is key to an effective anti-capitalist agenda and is inevitable if the app fails to deploy properly, which turns their critiques about Harvey 15 cost struggles over housing are significant as wages and work conditions self-limitation is reluctant to take state power regarded as a state as an enemy without dominating story of Barcelona and Spain. The left is not good at answering how we build infrastructure, water supply, electricity, and so on. We need organization. No wings in the state, even the neoliberal state are informed. How do we respond to epidemics? We can't confront warming through decentralized confrontations. Montreal Protocol is successfully enforced by NATO organization. There will always be hierarchies and problems like accountability. There will be authority ways. Never been in an anarchist meeting where there's no secret structure fantasy of being horizontal. It's a hierarchical structure, but discover we have to create organization to enforce change in broader scale. The left doesn't make it. The right to the next option first step to freedom is the limit. The working new demands upon us face revolutionary. The revolutionary outcomes back to the consolidating power that without it, capitalism reasserts it. And anti-capitalist agenda is not about helping a cope, but to change the system, having a clear project, which is problematic with decentralized movements where others work a fish differently. Now, when I see Rodriguez is our link, what the fuck does it mean to live under the civilization and their means of resistance or protest, underground and political work, and uses groups like the anarchists that Harvey directly critiques are examples of as an example of absolutely that shows that the app is not committed to means of organizing that actively move to seize the levers of state control, but rather draw on as a means for resistance, which is co-opted. Like all the movements they cite, when I see Adams further that mutual aid is necessary outside of the state, further contributes to the abandonment of moving towards state control. Rodriguez tag says that abolition is not a destructive act, but affirms the possibility for building a new world here on earth. That is our link in abandons the party. When I see mental process, more racialized violence is not an extra economic but infrastructural. Only we offer sustainable infrastructural changes now. The impact is massive violence and climate extinction debate is key to developing the tools to bring about a revolution. As 1919, the capitalist climate crisis leads us on the brink of extinction, fastest leaders to sewage fears, and the marginalized suffer countries that are short for fossil fuels. More and more realize we must unite. We must know the tactics you are not, or unite around what is at the stake is possibility of revolution, and the alternative is to model the Communist Party Escalante 18 base building through the party organizing solidify the social standards the institution demonstrate the communists offer relief is not enough to meet the needs. We must have a public party who is aligned, determined to democratic central decision making, creates internal methods for organizers to be held accountable with unity to work chauvinist ideas, self organizing ought to adopt a unified national party. Now reject permutations. One, they don't get one absent a coherent plan text. Any distinction between the app and the neg should be able to prove competition. Otherwise, it makes it impossible to debate them because the app can constantly shift what destroys fairness. Second, is independently means it can't access our frameworks. They destroy their forms of revolutionary class to cultivate radical organizing. Now, one sees values stand on synod, responding to it with judgment, and the ballot is a whole validation that siphons all political energy and draws them into the oppressive gaze of the economy. Vote negative to decline affirmation. Phillips in 99 concerns centers around the level of the central position communities as objects of investigation, the critical activation of change in discourse because instrument to outlet communities that academic critic contradicts the disruptive nature onto offering inadequate art for taking speaking out of the streets and studying in the classroom, retreating out classes, a protest and object of analysis within the academy without addressing whether the critic should be examining in the first place or to believe members are prepared to be brought into arena surveillance. Perhaps representation must tell legitimacy nonetheless effect disruptive siphon of energy into academic practice would ensure that cathesis recognition take place in material opportunities, but will legitimation and create any changes in conditions. Cut the credit conditions out. Case proper. Exclusively weight impacts with the causal connection to solvency. Force them to explain the way they're internally scale up to the impacts. Any attempt to filter offense through the speech talk is an arbitrary goal that only serves to insulate it from criticism and nuance testing. Extinction always its infinite for value in the process of killing billions of violent, painful deaths, and the risk we're right, always the risk we're wrong. Biological death always is painful, irreversible, and progress is possible. Death is the only truly fixed ontological state, and their offense is ontological. Their impacts prove that they agree with the premise that violence and suffering are bad, so minimizing it certainly outweighs consequentialism as good as inevitable. They cannot simultaneously win their impact and be extinction outweighs. The critiques are not mutually exclusive with the TVA nor with the state. There's no reason mutual aid is not transactional. They've critiqued transactional behaviors in the 1AC, but services to care for each other and to serve each other is a form of transaction, which means they link into their own thesis. And Rodriguez makes totalizing claims about whiteness, protesting, underground work, political work, etc. are not mutually exclusive with the alternative. You should start that on your flow, but the app also sells nothing. Adamson says that there are networks to have groceries and medicine. They still need to buy those, which requires jobs to work, and simply doing things like offering free breakfast programs aren't enough to scale up their solvency, which means that you should force the one or two to explain solvency better. Now, the 1AC's call for mutual aid is harmful. Cycles of indebtedness create a cycle of resiliency and self-blame that employers empowers capitalism and overburdens movements. Hummel in 2020, mutual aid groups feel void left on the state's total to for survival. The most vulnerable since projects depend upon sharing resources difficult to maintain at the left or organize instead of having to scramble for varied resources. We can apply material pressure, organize access, solidarity, and demand on the state. The build class consciousness organization. The organizing working class must engage with it and make demands upon the state during maximum employment and mutual defense against evictions. And occupy standing proofs and illustration of limitations of mutual aid. Political distinction between mutual aid and charity was not clear despite impressive efforts getting the electricity back on and the subways running depended upon the state. Group left no form of organization behind labor unions crucial for not only win important material gains but strengthen working class or self-organization. The app puts the onus on the oppressed people rather than the structures creating those systems, which means they can't solve.
Hey.
Good for Chris.
Good.
Why was the app unpredictable?
Couple of things. Every definition proves it.
What's the baseline for predictability for definitions?
Sure. First of all, we've read definitions in the context that have intent to define what words in the resolution mean. So,
Sure,
yeah, that doesn't answer my question. What makes these definitions predictable?
Because they have intent to define words
Well,
in the resolution.
yeah, like, so the only baseline is intent to define in the context of legal S.
Well, so a couple of things. When debaters look at the resolution, obviously the first instinct is to research about the resolution.
Wait,
and when you research
wait,
about
so
things,
why is that every debater's instinctual reaction? That seems to
because
obviously
debate is a research activity and it's a game
That's
where
the
we
only-
have to
wait,
read
so
evidence.
That's the only thing that we get from debate is that it's a game, it's a research activity.
A couple of things. So you learn things from debate. It's certainly an educational activity, but ultimately it's a competition, and competitive forums are games.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess specifically, the case debate, why does this distinction outweigh? You read the analytic, but obviously, like,
No card.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. The analytics certainly justify that extinction is bad. It's violent.
How does an analytic justify an overarching theory about how we ought to act in the world of, like, anti-black?
Well, yeah, because the analytic justifies that extinction is something that the process would cause millions upon billions of painful deaths
Okay.
that are violent. There's no way that is something that is good in any world.
Okay, the status of the academy case?
Conditional.
Status of the alternative on the cap case?
Also conditional.
Okay, great. So I guess specifically the TV, or like why, when we sort of critique understandings of like transactionalism in the context of purely economic analysis, why are things like social wages in which we owe like one another, like sort of forms of like community care, etc., why are those things transactional? How are they quantified?
Sure. So a transaction is when people give things to each other. Like if I make a transaction at a store, I will pay for a good with money. That is a transaction where I give something and I receive something back. There's no reason why that's distinct from like mutual aid transactions.
I guess in the
because-
context of the resolution, when we like critique forms of what it means to like, I guess, give a living wage, why specifically is this true?
Like the TVA specifically, or like why the
No,
act is
just this
transactional?
analytical argument.
Yeah, so critiquing forms of a living wage doesn't mean that the plan isn't transactional. That could critique the fact that a living wage is transactional, but that doesn't mean that the AF itself isn't. We've critiqued the notion that you think the AF is not transactional by saying that
Okay.
mutual aid relies on that.
Wait, this case card, it doesn't seem to warrant the tagline. It talks about how mutual aid groups sort of fill the void left by the state's total regard for the survival of the most vulnerable. This seems to be an AF card, and concedes that the AF is probably a good idea. Why?
The Hummel evidence?
Yeah.
I think it's very much a neg card. It says that the concept of mutual aid is a form of charity that can never do things like get electricity for people. It can
Okay,
only do
that
small
makes
scale
sense.
changes.
Is it 5 or 4?
I think 5, right?
Okay. Okay, 342 left. Any cards? The order will be the AF, the Academy K, the Cap K, and the
You said Academy, CAB, framework?
yeah,
Okay. And no doc, right?
no.
Okay, I'm good, whatever.
Everyone good?
Vote affirmative for mutual aid as a social way to build alternative networks to ensure racial capitalism. Only we are two living ways by going outside of the fiction of the finance to form intimacies, as well as material readjust together competition here. First is that no, you should be able to weigh the impact of the affirmative against anything else rather than debate. Otherwise, it just evolves into bad forms of debate in which offense becomes ontological. Now, biological death. We'll do that on the CAP-K. We'll do that on the COP-K. But counterculturalism, yes, we can concede it's good, but some fact, in fact, definitely matter more. E.g., slow social violence in the context of extinction and impact out there, which will be done in the affirmative debate. Now the mutual aid is harmful and tautological arguments group them. The card does not concede that mutual aid is harmful or charity, but rather the create a form of indebtedness in which we create affective forms of systems of relationality, which the scope of their card cannot grapple with. They say the app is interactional. Obviously, it is not. The CX was not able to clarify why specifically these forms of transaction are exactly creating or utilizing forms of money, which is not what the affirmative utilizes. The capital or the economic K. First is permitting both from each parallel narrative solve of the better academic overcut or bad innovating to voting off commodification and inevitable in the status quo of the LinkedIn has power to shift current systems within the alternative is bad first mythology. They victimly black scholars who use the economy's visibility against itself in black liberatory fantasy that naturalizes racism and equality through submission. Second is fatalism, the theorization is violent for people of color who use the economy to theorize community or racist minorities in the academy weaponization into the university produce alternative pedagogy which sees the university to racist. That means that they don't abolish the university, but rather just create the means for white supremacists to operate within the capital. The app analysis of racial capitalism is a root cause to the impact. First, that the affirmative is a huge link term. We define racial identity and predicate cap by being in a mode of constant indebtedness with each other. This indebtedness poses an alternative the system. Second is horizontal or organizing through the vertical. But Melin says that it's non-exclusionary. Only the party has to solve through collective care. Now the first link. No, this card talks about base building in the context of protest. We are not. When I see Rodriguez says that we are a form of collective care. Second is the point out we don't have leadership. That's the point. The necessity individuation. The other is that we've impacted the political power that they have talked about in terms of the bottom portion of the card. Now you should protect the impact calculus that they will never go for the human heart. In the human heart, you should prioritize slow and marginal violence that you can calculate here and now, which means that you vote affirmative in terms of articulation. The Rodriguez link is nil. The piece says obviously we should be able, are able to solve their offense in terms of articulating why their method is uniquely good. Yes, perm. You should the plain text is relevant insofar we have a critique their formulation of the capitalism case. Secondarily, is that it means that we can't access the impact transfer framework in turn of whether or not their method is bad. Framework. Counter-theorization debate is more than just a game. The calling to cops racial provides materials to determine how its competitive nature is formed by racialized procedures that must be put on hold to facilitate moments of performance and care that black people need desperately now. To continue their mode of living counter-intro affirms must defend reading of the resolution. U.S. means we, some people, and the living wages social ways that want to see Rodriguez, James, and Addison's core topic controversy because the question of what we ought to do in order to be paid to survive one another is encompassed by the question of what survival is in an unlivable world. Now the universe individuation just had institutional analysis of impact out there replaces the communal pedagogy about anti-Watkins in here that is debated from interpersonal violence foreclosing the intimacy and the sphere. Survival studies that prevent burnout in our daily lives turn every impact because the industry is the prerequisite putting this burden solely on us. Magnifies the exhaustion. We'll do the TVA debate here. TVA 1 no does not solve your critique transactionalism, which utilizing living wages will report the distancing that above. So TVA 2 no capital relations are exactly what we have critique. You cannot critique the scope. You cannot capture the scope of the affirmative. 1 and T3 no whole they're defending a whole resolution does not maintain money, but will maintain the transactional formulation. But exactly what we have critique fairness here. First is surrender your ballot. Your ballot to practice is the only thing that your ballot has proximity to. Racial micro affirmations here and now affirm black sociality. Second is impact fairness. Only matters when they are justified why maintaining the violent gain is important. If it limits is irrelevant. The counter-interp checks against it, which means that it's not necessarily garner offense now. It's not extra topical. You only garner offense outside of the advocate text, and clash is a non-starter because of the dissent.
Okay, 5 minutes. Starting now. Reason to reject the team.
No.
Okay. Okay. No doc. Order is Capke, Framework Academy case.
Alright, let's do it.
I'm good.
Perfect.
Sorry, can you do it one more?
Yeah. Capke, Framework, the Academy K, and then the case. Okay, perfect. Capitalism causes extinction extinction, it collapse emboldens fascists, elites of sea is power while accelerating a climate crisis that propels resource wars, food shortages, rising sea, and mass population displacements that filters out solvency. Their investment is limited into political social energy because they can only temporarily escape fascism through their localized movements. It's tried to produce revolutionary heuristics with the speed, scope, and skill necessary to ensure that violence isn't predetermined. That comes first. One is terminal impact uniqueness. Fascist uprising are imminent now. That's when it's escalante. That strengthens NATO military power, which exacerbates every impact and it outweighs diversionary lash, causes nuclear war, which is irreversible, and turns all of their framing at every level of and scale. Think about it this way: fascism certainly turns the case. It ensures that far-right leaders circumvent the plan, ensure that mutual aid is never possible, and will strike down the plan. Second, it turns case. They crack down on fragmented movements. They lack the social infrastructure to collective defense and collapsing on unequal wartime economies. The app ends up like every failed example we'll cite on the Capgate in a second. Absent collective organizing, fascists can monopolize resources like food and water, which forces people to depend on them for survival, which means that mutual aid will never be effective enough. Now, framing issue is collapse as an impact filter. Their impacts are worse in a world with no normative or legal distinction, limitations on violence. That means uniqueness flips negative on all of their impacts, which answers one area of defense. A world in mutual aid means there's no form of accountability. People just provide things for each other, but what does that mean? How does that look like? What does organizing look like? All of those have to be answers. The two-air wins. It makes for a sufficient win condition. Now, extinction outweighs and turns the case. One is that we do not need to win this necessarily to win the debate, but you know the biological death is bad because it assuages people to painful, violent deaths that are completely irreversible, and the process causes millions of violent deaths. It is tautological to say that extinction is good and that the impact doesn't matter because it certainly affects every impact. Violence is bad at every level, and their evidence concedes that they only say that slow and violent impacts outweigh, but extinction certainly accomplishes that. A world with fascism and climate change being dumped on poor, climate change affecting poor communities, lack of infrastructure, agriculture, etc., certainly would be bad underneath their framework. But secondly, we'll win the link debate, and we'll do it here. Now, you should vote negative because 1NC Harvey is the best link in this debate, and just proves the permutation. It directly critiques the method of the plan, the best link you can get. The reluctance to take power and regard the state as the enemy is exactly what happened with failing Barcelona and Spain movements, where they fell back into the hands of the bourgeois, and the state utterly smashed their movements of mutual aid. Their notion of mutual aid is precisely this: how does the plan build infrastructure for people, not just to live, but to thrive in? You should ask yourself, how do they provide water, electricity, shelter to each other? How do they do these things? The one here just says that we should mutually do things for each other, but do not let a utopian two-air that fiats everything. They've only cited examples like breakfast programs. How is that enough to do any of the arguments that they say are good? Now, 1NC Harvey evidence is fantastic and says that in every structure that has succeeded in the context of aid or in the context of mutual aid and communism, etc., there was always authority in some way. Even through anarchist meetings, there's some sort of secret structure, which means that there's a fantasy of being horizontal, which directly indicts their one-air argument in creating organizations and to enforce change on a broader scale can only happen if there's a sustained amount of consolidation of power through the state and fighting with the state. But you need to have a clear political project about that. Absent that, there's no centralization, and people working differently means there's no unified political organization. An organization, and the plan it certainly fails. Now, the line by Harvard, they say that F says racial cap is the root cause. This is irrelevant because even if you critique the notion of capitalism, you don't have a way to solve for it. Now, 1NC2, they say there's constant indebtedness to each other. That does not answer the question of the link. We cite empirical evidence of the things like Barcelonian and Spain movements where they fell back into the hands of these bourgeois movements. The state violently cracked down on their ideas of mutual aid because none of these things were possible. And the 1NC Harvey evidence directly says that horizontal planning is a fantasy and it can never succeed. Now, 103, they say collective care. We've critiqued their notion of what collective care means. We think that collective care is good, but it needs to be done through a unified party, and the impact, they say the impact turned political power, but that's not answered by our thesis. That doesn't answer our thesis because we'll reinsert the links here. Now, first of all, 1NC Rodriguez says, what does it mean to live under civilization, protest, underground, and political work? And it uses empirical examples of groups that have failed, which means that because they never were able to take the levers off of state control. Secondly, 1NC Manjapara literally says that violence is not extra economic, but it is infrastructural. Absent explaining solvency, the two-air cannot explain why all of these things are able to solve the case. They say mutual aid is necessary outside of the state. That directly proves that the permutation is never possible because we say that some form of state action is good. They directly critique that, which means reject two-air ethos analysis. Now, the alternative proper, vote negative for communist organizing. That's 1NC Escalante. Vanguard parties recruit members by providing services such as food, water, arms, and political education, and shows the masses the failures of capitalism, creating disinvestment from maintaining the system. That's a prerequisite to any form of political movement. That internal link turns all of their case because it's not only just about providing these things for each other, but how we can further change the system, reform it in a way that creates disinvestment from the system in a coherent political manner that ensures it doesn't fail. That certainly solves the case because it creates a new governance structure that's truly representative of everyone and decreases polarization and becomes internationalist and enables global socialist governance where they can handle every threat better through revolutionizing things. They haven't read a dissent to revolutionize anything, so that means you automatically error affirmative now. They make justifications for the permutation, but they're all wrong. We did the analysis about for why every link is a dissent to the permutation, but you should either explicitly be against capitalism or you're complicit in its terror, and winning a link proves that the aff is independently good enough. Now, plaintext and they also don't get a permutation because any distinction between the aff and the neg should be able to prove competition. They just make arguments about how the K's and disadvantages check, but that is irrelevant. These are arguments that we cannot establish those links in the first place. If the winner can always just shift out of things at no link arguments. Now the case page now framework, not going for it, concede the counter inter, the academy K concede the perm just to test the competition case. We don't need to win much here. All we have to win is that the case solves the case, which we've already done. But they've conceded too many arguments on the case page. First is that there's no way the app scales up because things like Adam says there are networks to have groceries and medicine, but those they still need to buy those, which requires jobs to work. Even if this argument doesn't seem very good, the winner just straight up dropped it, which means they have no way to solve.
Arguments against the permutation proper were just links or dissent to the permutations. They're wrong. Either you're against capitalism or you're not.
Yeah, that was fine.
Okay. Okay. The order will be case, framework, and decay. Everyone good?
Yes.
Okay, are you good?
Vote affirmative for mutual aid as a social aid to build an alternative network to return racial capitalism. Only we are two living ways by going outside of the fiction of finance. Now, scalar competition was shoddily extended, but they dropped that you should prioritize what's proximately about, which is the only thing that you can solve, which means that you should go to framework. Anti-blackness is here and now. Racist procedures of the car-calling surveillance and community divide and to disseminate competitive nature of the procedures must be put on pause to ensure the livability of black communities have more than speaker points and ballots at stake. This is exactly how you weigh the impact on your RFD, and you risk this space can create encounters that generated black sociality in which you know that they have conceded case and care is sufficient to affirm because resolving material impact at the level of intercommunal violence comes prior to intangible things like the inevitable impact of extinction out there, which drop individuation, which can be caused by the cap can mean that you know that you prioritize instances of anti-blackness here and now conceded framing about surrendering with zeros any office user or ballot should only you must surrender your ballot to during moments of black sociality that are absolutely pretext for access to any benefit under their certain capitalistic orientation, which means that you know the only thing that your ballot can actually do rather than organizing or fiating whatever party they call for is surrendering to blackness. It was dropped, so you know it's under 100. Okay. The case outweighs in terms of decay. Racial capitalism is better analytic to understand the Jewish economic contradiction of capital. Rodriguez, which impacted in linked terms the inevitable project of the capitalist accumulation requires a regulation of reproductive capacity and a reproductive capacity to create desire between division and class. Their interpretation of use of wage cannot account for the racialized and engineered forms of social reproduction that are not considered wage raised under the Marxist analysis, which are things like care work, e.g. the way that they said that we cannot articulate what sort of things happen in the world of the affirmative, water, food, etc., etc. Those things cannot be calculated because the calculable logics that the affirmative or the negative has invested itself into or something that we have critiqued now that should warrant permutation to both. We must combine political economic critique with the demand to seize the means of social reproduction. The alt cannot fiat organizing without thinking about the erased labor that organized an organization in the first place. The BPP free practice program, stars housing, DIY hormone projects, the pieces, insurgency, medical innovation, and distribution, all examples for the 1AC job in the protest to top cost city, all reveal that mutual aid is an integral part of base building to make organizing sustainable. Now the only response, the permutations or links are disad, but will link turn their inevitable project drop from 1AR that their orientation towards things of political grain are unable to calculate the way that black sociality is formulated here and now, which creates a significant question in terms of how you envision the party, e.g. how does the party get off the ground absent if black people don't want to join the party, which is a terminal deficit that's dropped in terms of articulation of the Chapman now the link analysis that they said from 1AC Rodriguez, they just reasserted the 1AC but did not do any analysis in terms of how this is directly linked to the cap case, so you know that A, case is true, and B, that the underground political work that it talks about is a necessary precondition to creating thing of capitalist reproduction. Now the extinction is irrelevant but is a net benefit for the permutation to both. Initially conceded perm to each, which means that we can do both alternative organizing out there and affirming black sociality and here.